Hello and welcome, and this is Peter. The very first thing I would like to say is thank you very much for listening to this audio today. I really appreciate you, so thank you for listening. Today's topic is the topic of right versus wrong versus the distinction called workable. Okay? So right versus wrong versus the distinction called workable. And that's what we're going to talk about in this audio today. Alright? So, right versus wrong. If you go and talk to anybody, they will tell you just how right they are about how many different things. One of the things that people are absolutely addicted to is being right. Okay, their opinion is right. And you'll see this most clearly expressed through things like religions. So young babies are born into households and they grow up in the household and they adopt the religion of the parents to whom they were born through the accident of birth. And by the time they get into their teens or perhaps 20s, they are absolutely convinced that their religion is the one true right religion. And for all of human history, people have been willing to go out and kill other people over the question of religion, right? So let me say that again. Over the course of human history, people have been willing to go out and kill each other over the question of religion. Because, damn it, their religion is the right one and your religion is the wrong one. And this continues today. Today, there's a great deal of religious violence around the world. Look at the Catholics and the Protestants in Ireland and how long they fought over issues. And Catholicism and Protestantism is not that far apart. People who have 99 and 98% of things in common will fight and kill and die over the 1 to 2% that is not in common. That's the story of human history, gentlemen, and it's wise to take note of that. Okay? So there is a fixed way of being called being right. I am right about something, whatever that something is. Damn it, I'm right. I've thought about it. I've looked it up in books. I've talked to other people, etc., etc. And damn it, I'm right and you are wrong. How often in your life, gentlemen, have you heard somebody say, Fred, you're wrong about that? Or even worse, gentlemen, how often in your life have you said to somebody else, Fred, you're wrong about that? Okay? Or even where you've left the about that off and just said, Fred, you're wrong. And you've made Fred wrong. Or Fred has made you wrong. How often has that happened in your life? I'm pretty sure it has happened a great number of times in your life. Because, gentlemen, I'm 55. I turned 55 recently. And I can tell you, I have been told I am wrong a gazillion times. Literally a gazillion times. Not about something, but just Pete, you're wrong. Sometimes you're wrong about that, but just Pete, you're wrong. Pete, you're wrong. And you know something, gentlemen? The average person is a wrong-making machine. The average person has the fixed way of being called being right, and they are a wrong-making machine, and anybody who expresses an opinion different to what they feel they are right about, well, they'll make that person wrong. And it's a dichotomy. It's just a two-sided coin. You are either right or you are wrong. End of story. You believe the same thing as me, and therefore you are right, or you don't believe the same thing as me, and therefore you are wrong. And people so rarely take the time to even add about that, the topic about which you disagree. That's very seldomly do people say, we disagree on that topic, and that's fine. they don't talk like that. They talk about, oh, you believe such and such. Well, you're wrong. You're wrong. You are wrong. Sometimes they'll say you are wrong about that. Very rarely will they say you and I have a disagreement of opinion on that topic, and that's okay. We can agree to disagree. That's not a problem. That's actually fairly rare to hear somebody say, right? So I just wanted to introduce this audio by reminding you that across your lifetime, many people have told you you are wrong. Some have said about that, and very few have said we have a difference of opinion on this point, and that's okay, because differences of opinion are perfectly okay. That's something that I bet you have rarely heard, right? Now, if we are awash with this right and wrong, if most people have this fixed way of being called being right, and they'll be right about everything, and they'll get into arguments about their being right, no matter how little evidence they have to base that judgment on, if that's what people are doing, is being right, and what they're doing is people who disagree with them, they are being wrong-making machines and making them wrong. If that's what's going on out in the world, and I can assure you that's what's going on out in the world, what way of being might work better? But before we talk about that, how do you think that all works in the sales cycle? How do you think it works in persuading people to take committed action that you want them to take when they're a being right and a wrong-making machine, and you show up, right? And when you show up, you can rest assured that unless you're very agreeable and you agree with them on pretty much every point, they'll make you wrong. And when they're making you wrong and they're disagreeing with you, then they're not going to buy anything from you, right? And this is sales training, right? So how does this affect the sales cycle? Well, in the sales cycle, 9 times out of 10, the people that you're dealing with, and generally if you're selling a deal, any substantial deal, you're dealing with a number of people. That number of people will have their fixed way of being called being right. You tell them anything contrary to what they believe, they're going to call you wrong. And you're supposed to sell to these people, right? You're supposed to sell to these people. Now, the approach most salesmen take is the pandering approach. They pander to their customer, tell them they're right, agree with them all the time, and then move along to get the sale. But unfortunately, as you go down the track, stuff will happen, particularly in business intelligence. Stuff will happen. The customer will do something that's clearly wrong, and then if you point it out to them, oh my, they will get very upset about that. And that may end your deal, right? That may end your deal. So that happens, gentlemen, that happens. Many salesmen go into accounts and they pander to the customer and they let the customer be right all the time, and they're very agreeable with everything the customer says, even if they don't agree with it themselves. They'll say, yeah, I agree with that, yeah, you're right, and you're so wonderful, and you're so magnificently intelligent, and you're so intelligent you should be buying this deal from us. Salesmen will do all that stuff. And down the track, when the customer criticizes the salesman for some area or other, he has a choice of either continuing to pander or trying to push back. And if he pushes back at that point in time, having never established the relationship for pushing back, then the customer's going to make him wrong, and that could be the end of the deal. Certainly over a period of time it will be the end of the deal, right? It'll be the end of the ongoing agreement. So what's a better way to look at this, both in the sales situation and in life in general? Right and wrong, black and white, that's how it is. You don't agree with me, you're wrong. What's another way to look at that? Well, the way we do this at Landmark, is we insert another distinction. And this distinction is called workable. Does it work or not? Now, some people would call that moral relativism, and I would dismiss that as an argument, because having been around this stuff for nearly 25 years now, I don't see it at all as moral relativism. You can have your morals, and you can believe what you believe to be right, and you can believe what you believe to be wrong. That's fine. I don't care if you believe in right or wrong. Okay? But in Workable, if you start very early in the piece with the customer, start talking with the prospect as they are at that time, start talking about what works and what's workable, and steer the conversation away from right and wrong to what works and what doesn't work. What will happen is, between you and the customer and the members of the customer, the various different participants, if you steer away from the absolutism of right and wrong in your relationships with your customer and steer towards the far grayer area of what works and what doesn't work, because things work to an extent. Things work as a percentage. Things work across a wide range of values. Something that works has a very wide variation in works, what can be said to work. Whereas in right and wrong, there's no wide variation. It is either right or wrong. It can't be halfway. But works, something that works, it can work really, really, really well. It can work fairly well. It can work moderately well. It can work not so great, and it can not work at all. There's a very wide range of works. It's workable, right? So in the sales process, right from early in the piece, if you start talking about what works versus what doesn't work, and talking about the degree to which something works, what you will do with your prospect is you'll diffuse the whole right and wrong discussion. You'll put that to one side. You'll slowly but surely push that to the side, and you'll be talking about what works and what doesn't work, and to what extent does it work, how well does it work, to what degree does it work. And when you go down that path, you'll find that you don't set yourself up for conflict later on with the customer, right? The members of the customer. You'll find that if you have very early on steered the conversation down what works and what doesn't work, rather than what's right and what's wrong, and you've not pandered to the customer when the customer has thrown the bait out there for you to talk about what's right or what's wrong, and you've avoided taking the bait, and you've talked about what works and what doesn't work, if you've done that in the lead up with the customer, then at the end of the day, you're going to have a better relationship with that customer, because you're going to focus on talking about what works for that customer in their unique situation with their unique requirements. And this works here. That's what you talk about. So for example, I'll give you some examples, right? With the great Sean Kelly. We were in a discussion with a customer, a telephone company, who wanted to use SQL Server as a data warehouse database. And we, with our vendor partner, said we would not bid SQL Server, and we would not make any commitment or guarantee on SQL Server. In fact, if the customer insisted on SQL Server, we would not accept the contract. We said you could use DB2, UDB, heaven forbid. They didn't want DB2 mainframe. They could use Oracle. They could use Sybase IQ. They could use Netezza. They could use a variety of databases that we were absolutely happy to implement this data warehouse on, but we would not do it on SQL Server. And in part of the discussion, one of the tech people from the customer said, well, what's wrong with SQL Server? Okay, that was the question that came out. What's wrong with SQL Server? Now, how did Sean Kelly approach that? He smiled and he laughed to lighten the mood because the person was obviously aggravated. This was one of the people in the customer who was pushing SQL Server. He smiled and he laughed and he said there's absolutely nothing wrong with SQL Server. It's a wonderful database. It's a fine database. We've done a great deal of work on SQL Server. Absolutely, we do not say one bad word about SQL Server. It's a great database, was his first response. Okay? The next thing he said was, he didn't say however, he didn't say but. The next thing was, he said, in your specific situation for a telephone company, sure, you're a startup and your volumes are not very large today. However, I wish you every success and your volumes should be much larger a year or two down the track. SQL Server, even though it's a fine database, it won't work in your environment, in your specific situation, if you have the success that we all hope that you have. And that is a way better way to answer that objection than, well, SQL Server is wrong for this situation. For your situation, SQL Server is the wrong database. Now, a lot of sales reps would say to that objection coming at them, would say, well, SQL Server is wrong for your situation. They would use the word wrong in the context of this discussion and this situation. Not Sean Kelly. Sean emphasized that he thought SQL Server was a fine database, that we'd done work with it, which we had, and we'd used it, worked well in those situations, and in the situation in which we were currently in with the current customer, wishing you the success that we all hope that you have, SQL Server won't work. It doesn't work in this environment. Not that it's wrong, not that it's right, that it won't work in this environment. So then the questioning went down the road of, well, why wouldn't it work? You say it won't work, why wouldn't it work? Whereas if he had said it's the wrong database for you, well, that's a religious argument, right? Right and wrong always degenerates into a sort of religious argument where works and doesn't work moves forward in a much more amicable manner. And that brought Sean to the ability to say, well, the partitioning functions on SQL Server, well, very good for the sorts of databases that we've used it for, and we have lots of customers on SQL Server. The partitioning function is fairly limited. It only gives you one value to partition on. So when you want to partition across multiple values, you have to have an algorithm for that, and you have to maintain it. It has to be understood, and all the queries coming through have to have this complex little piece of code to manage the partitioning function. And the guy goes, oh, I didn't know that. He said, yeah, and the bitmap indexing, this was before bitmap indexes were made available. He said, the bitmap indexing is only in process. It creates bitmaps during the process of the query. They're not persistent like Oracle and other databases. So you don't get the advantages of bitmap indexing, and bitmap indexing is really important. Plus, there's no columnar aspect of a database. It doesn't at any point store data in columns. And databases like Sybase and Netezza use columnar techniques in areas, in ways inside the database, which gives you a massive performance improvement in a query environment. Works very badly in transaction update environments, columnar storage of data, but in BI environments, it gives you 100 times performance boost. These are just some of the things that mean SQL Server won't work in a large database environment like a telephone company. Great database. I'm not saying anything is bad about the database, but in your sort of environment, it doesn't scale to that level. This is why. And when Sean went through that conversation, the guy was like, "Oh, they are things I didn't know. Thank you." It was almost like, "Thank you for teaching me something today. I didn't realize that these other databases that you're talking about had some very specific features, as you mentioned, that are not in SQL Server for scalability in BI. And as you mentioned, don't work in transaction processing, which is what SQL Server is really built for." And it was almost like, "Thank you for enlightening me today, Sean," rather than getting into an argument. Now, in the end, we didn't get the deal, and they did go with SQL Server, and it didn't work, right? But that's a really good example of how Sean went around that. And there was, in the days that I was doing sales calls and working with Sean, there was a lot of similar such situations. And I've done similar such things myself, where the customer is asking, "Well, do you believe this is the right way to go?" Lots of customers will have a discussion with you about some point or other, and then they will end it with, "Do you believe this is the right way to go?" And that's the worm on the hook, gentlemen. In the sales situation, the worm on the hook is when the customer asks you a question like, "Do you believe this is right?" or "Do you think this is right?" or "Do you believe this is wrong?" or "Do you think this is wrong?" That's the worm on the hook. That's the customer giving you the chance to be agreeable, to believe in the same religion that he believes in. That's your opportunity to do that. Okay? And as much as you feel like the right thing to do is to take the bait and be right about what the customer said and rub him the right way and pander to him, as much as you might think that's the best thing to do at that point in time, it's not. And years and years of sales calls have told me it's not the best thing to do to nod your head and agree and say, "Yeah, that's the right thing to do." It's not the best thing to do over the relationship of the customer. And I know that sounds counterintuitive. And I know you're sitting there saying, "But Pete, the guy has given me an opportunity to agree with him and say, 'Yeah, Fred, you're right. I agree with you. I think you're right. You are right. Let's move forward.'" How could that possibly be not the best thing to do in that situation, Pete? I didn't get it. And the answer is because there will come a time when he says you're wrong. Where there will come a time where you do disagree with him. And if you haven't laid the groundwork on workability versus right and wrong, when that time comes, well, that time will have a higher level of conflict attached to it. So when your customer or prospect says, "Well, I believe this is the right thing to do. What do you think, Fred? Is this the right thing to do?" The answer is, well, considering your unique circumstances and taking into account my extensive experience in these matters, I think this is a very workable way to approach this situation. I believe this will work. And The customer will hear that, as you do these things ongoingly through the relationship, the customer will hear that as I'm right. But over time, the customer will notice he's not telling me I'm right, he's telling me it works. They will notice. And then when the time comes, and the customer says, this is wrong, or you're wrong about this, Fred, and you reframe that to be, well, let's look at how this works, how well this works. No, you're wrong, Fred. Yeah, I understand you really feel that I'm wrong in this situation, but let's look at how it works. When you reframe it like that, from right or wrong to how well does it work, gentlemen, I can guarantee you that you are going to have far better relationships with your customers if you move away from pandering on, yes, you're right, Fred, as much as that sounds like the right thing to do, as much as it sounds like if I reinforce with my customer when he's right and how well he understands things, and I pander to him to get him to like me, if I keep going down that path, surely that's the right path to go down. The answer is actually no. It's not the most workable path to go down. The most workable path to go down with your customers, where you want a long-term relationship with this customer, the path to go down, the most workable path to go down, is the path of workability, not the path of right or wrong. Okay? So when the customer throws out the hook with the worm on it and says, I feel really passionately about this, Fred, and I think this is the right way to go. What do you think, Fred? Is this the right way to go? Don't take the bait. Whatever you do, don't take the bait and say, yes, Jim, I believe this is the right way to go. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Say, absolutely, Jim, I think this will work the best in this situation. And just each time you're talking with the customer, throw in that workability angle. Throw in, this is how this works. Or, I'm not so sure this is working so well. Rather than, this is wrong. I'm not so sure this is working so well. I'm not sure how well this is working. I think we need to review this to see how well it is working. All those sorts of things. When you put it on the workability line, rather than the right or wrong line, your relationship with your customer is going to be substantially better over the extended period. Substantially better. Okay? And, I could give some examples out of my own past, doing things like calculating sales, forecasts, and trying to figure out what works best in sales forecasting. I did a job many years ago in Australia for a publisher, and we were trying to figure out forecasting. And boy, I mean, the ERP they had did a bad job of forecasting, and they had a lot of wasted magazines. They had sellouts, and these were sellouts and oversupplies. And oversupplies were at the end of the week of the run of the magazine, you just have way many left. Or the sellout is you get to the end of the week of the magazine and they're sold out. They're sold out on the Thursday or the Friday. Because in Australia we have Thursday night shopping. So you don't want the magazine to be sold out by Thursday, because Thursday night shopping is a big sales day for magazines in Australia. And even on the Saturday, you still want a couple left on the shelf, even though they're now nearly a week old. I mean, the magazines in Australia, the weeklies, go on sale on Monday, and you still sell a few on the Saturday. You don't sell many on the Sunday, but you still sell a few on the Saturday. So you want them to be on the shelf on the Saturday. But if there's none on the shelf, say Thursday or Friday, that's kind of a sellout. Somebody comes in on the Saturday, says, do you have this XYZ magazine? And the shopkeeper says, well, no, we ran out of that. And they go, well, I might have the competitor one, the one that's almost the same. I might have the competitor one, right? Well, we were trying to figure out how to do this forecasting better than the ERP, and there was plenty of arguments about it because you don't know how well your forecast is going to turn out, right? When you do sales forecasting, what you have to do is build your forecasting algorithms and then compare them with the actuals historically to see how well you're doing your forecasting, and then hope that the future is somewhat representative of the past, that sort of thing. And I can tell you that in sales forecasting, there's some very passionate people who really believe they're right about what it is that they're saying, and there's those very passionate people will very quickly tell you just how wrong you are in what it is that you're suggesting. So we had a few heated debates in that area. And pretty much every time I was working on sales forecasting, very heated debates, very right and wrong. People were very attached to their ideas in sales forecasting. And let me assure you, gentlemen, if you're in the business of selling business intelligence systems, you're also in the business of selling sales forecasting tools and algorithms and results, because there's not a decent sized business out there who wouldn't give an arm and a leg to be able to accurately forecast sales across their product range in stores. That is an incredibly important function, and it's very much up to the whim of the consumer as to what the sales will actually be. So if you're in the BI sales business, which is why you're listening to these audios, you're also in the business of helping businesses forecast sales. And it's a very emotional area. Now, and I'll talk about Sean Kelly a bit in these audios. Sean came up with this brilliant idea when we were in Moscow in 2006. And we were in this discussion during the day, got fairly heated. And we were having dinner. And when I say dinner, I think it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. We'd left the office at 1 in the morning, and we were supposed to be back about 10. So we'd left the office at 1 in the morning, and we're having dinner in the bar, and now, because the restaurant was closed, we just got they had burgers and chips or something in the bar. And we were just having a chat. And Sean was just saying, this whole planning, estimating, forecasting thing, where just everybody is right. Nobody's thinking about what works. Everybody's right. Everybody else is wrong, making everybody else wrong. And he's like, Pete, we got to find a way out of this. We've just got to find a way out of this. And we just started talking backwards and forwards and talking backwards and forwards. And his eyes lit up and he goes, I've got it. We've got to have forecasting versions. We've got to version the forecast. And I'm like, version the forecast? Well, what do you mean? How do you explain that one to me? That's a new idea to me. And he says, well, if you put 4 analysts in a room about how to generate a forecasting algorithm, you get 5 algorithms, right? And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like asking 4 lawyers for an opinion. You get 5 different opinions. He goes, yeah, it's the same thing. You get 4 people doing sales forecasting in a room. You get 5 different opinions about how it's done. Why don't we do all 5? And we'll give them versions. Then we'll implement each of the different versions, and then we will run all the versions, and then we'll be able to actually see from the different versions which one works best. And I looked at him and I was like, why didn't I think of that? That's actually pretty simple. Why didn't I think of that? And that's why Sean Kelly was as great as he was, gentlemen. He would just come up with these different ideas all the time. We'd just sit there and batter backwards and forth and backwards and forth and backwards and forth, and just something would pop out of his unbelievably imaginative head. But forecasting versions doesn't sound like such a complicated thing, right? And so he came up with this idea, have versions of forecast, which I immediately took straight back to electronic arts. I was working at electronic arts at the time, and we were trying to do sales forecasting at electronic arts as well. And where we were in Russia, we were working for a pharmacy chain, and we were working on sales forecasting for the pharmacy chain. And I was independently working on sales forecasting at electronic arts. And next week I went back to electronic arts and said, boys, I've got a really good idea for you to help sort out all these arguments about sales forecasting. They're like, what's that? We're going to version them. They're like, Peter, you're brilliant. You're absolutely brilliant coming up with this versioning sales forecasting idea, which I absolutely owned, by the way, and told them, yeah, it was all my idea. Because Sean wasn't involved in the account. So by inserting versioning of forecasts rather than the argument of what sales forecast should we be writing, okay, you understand the difference. What we did in the Russian account was take the argument from right or wrong. Just one version of the forecast gets implemented, and we're going to test it. And so everyone's fighting over their version is right and everybody else's version is wrong. 2, you're all going to get your own version of the forecasting implemented, and then we're going to figure out, then we're going to see whose version works best. And of course, everybody in the discussion said, my version is going to work best. And within, as Sean did this meeting, it was like somebody flipped a switch over these angry Russians. It was like they went from yelling at each other and demanding that theirs be implemented and Igor, yours is wrong, or Boris, yours is wrong, or that kind of environment, to mine will be better than yours, Igor. You just watch. My version of the forecasting will work better than your version of the forecasting. And they went from criticizing and attacking each other, trying to get their ideas up, to being supremely confident that their idea would be the best idea, and you just wait and see. Yes, Igor, you think your version will be better than mine, but my version will work better than yours. And it was literally like somebody just flipped a switch or waved a wand. And that's how effective this can be, gentlemen. If you can turn the conversation around from right and wrong to workability, in that particular case, it was like somebody flipped a switch. Okay? Now, I'm also saying that you as a sales rep, you should be talking about what works best and how well things work and how some things don't work so well as other things in certain situations. You should be talking about those things early in your sales cycles to prepare the customer or customers or prospects for the frame of mind that when they call something wrong, you're going to go to workability, not to right or wrong. So what you will do in your accounts is, instead of getting involved in the religious arguments, you'll start to be more involved in cooperation and collaboration to seek what works best, and to get people to work together to seek what works best. Okay? And that's I can tell you, gentlemen, that's a very, very valuable lesson. Getting away from right and wrong to workability in the BI sales situation and the BI long-term relationship situation with customers, that is a much better way to go than to be drawn into the right and wrong argument. Now, of course, this goes for the same for relationships outside this particular context, right? If people were a little bit more interested in talking about what works, in terms of people getting along together versus, for example, my religion is the right religion and your religion is the wrong religion, and I'm going to kill you if you disagree with me. The world might just be a little bit better place. We might just get along with each other that little bit better, don't you think? But this training is very much about BI sales training. And in the BI sales training situation, and in the sales situation, you want to be turning around comments from your prospects and customers about what's right and what's wrong to how well does this work? To what extent does this work? What's the error factors in this? These sorts of things. Okay? So with that is 40 minutes for this audio. I think that's more than enough. So I would like to say today, thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate you listening to my audios, and I hope you come back for more. Thank you very much for listening, and bye for now.